Now listen here. You know how it is. Sometimes you work your whole life just to get to a place where you can finally sit back, put your feet up, and feel like you belong. You get that little piece of the American pie, that house with the fence, that quiet street. But then, sure as the sun rises, something, or maybe somebody, comes along trying to make you remember that ain't nothing ever simple. This here ain't just a story about a missing package. This is a story about a man who had to remind a whole neighborhood that a little peace and quiet has to be earned, and sometimes you gotta fight for it. So lean back, settle in, and let me tell you about Mr. Preston Jackson, a skunk, and the day truth came to town. Mr. Preston Jackson stood on the front porch of his new townhouse, staring at the empty spot where a box should have been. The question bouncing around in his head was simple: where are my packages going? Now this wasn't just a late delivery. The Aquanet tracking number said delivered. He'd even gotten the picture, a neat brown box sitting right by his front door. But now it was gone. This wasn't the first time either. In the 3 weeks since Mr. Jackson had moved into this quiet cul-de-sac, in Clover Hill 3 packages had vanished. One time you figure it's an accident, twice maybe a mistake. But 3 times? That wasn't a coincidence, that was a problem. At first he figured it was just some random porch pirate. You see enough on the news to know that happens all the time. But something about this place didn't sit right with him. This neighborhood had a gate, cameras at both entrances, and folks who kept an eye on things like they were the neighborhood watch. Strangers didn't just wander in and out unnoticed. So how could somebody just walk up to his door in broad daylight and take a box without anybody saying a word? He shook his head. Whoever was doing this wasn't sloppy. They were bold. That evening, he walked across the street to chat with his neighbor, Mr. Owen Williams, a man who always seemed to be watering his lawn. "Hey, Owen, quick question for you," Mr. Jackson said, hands in his pockets. "You notice anybody hanging around here earlier today? UPS dropped off a box for me, but it's gone now." Mr. Williams leaned on his rake, giving him a look that said he already knew where this was going. "You're not the first one," he said, lowering his voice even though no one else was around. "Couple of folks down the block mentioned the same thing. Word is Ms. Geraldine Thomas been seen walking off with boxes." Mr. Jackson frowned. "Ms. Thomas? The HOA president?" Mr. Williams nodded, pointing to the 2-story unit with the perfect rose bushes. "She lives right there. How do I put this? She keeps tabs on everyone. Says it's for the good of the community, but a few people think she helps herself to packages now and then." Mr. Jackson let out a short laugh, more out of disbelief than amusement. "You're telling me the HOA president is taking deliveries?" "Wouldn't shock me," Mr. Williams said. "She's got her hand in everything else." Later that week, Mr. Jackson caught Miss Thomas standing in his yard, clipboard in hand, staring at his shutters. When he stepped outside, she gave him a long lecture about paint shades and HOA guidelines. Something about her eyes, sharp, always watching, made the possibility feel real. Could the same woman who fined a neighbor for leaving a trash can out too long also be bold enough to steal packages right off porches? The puzzle pieces started to fall into place. He'd learned that Ms. Geraldine wasn't just the president, she was the HOA. People talked about how she dictated lawn heights and sent emails about what holiday decorations were acceptable. She once fined a retired couple for planting tomatoes instead of the approved shrubs. This was a woman who enjoyed her power. Still, Mr. Jackson wanted proof. He installed a motion-activated camera above his front door. He felt a little hope rise up in his chest. Finally, he'd have eyes on his porch 24/7. But 2 days later, another delivery vanished. He pulled up the footage. The delivery man placed the box on his porch at 11:06 a.m., then left. For the next hour, nothing. At 12:17 p.m., the box was just gone. No one was on camera. He took his frustration to Mr. Williams. "My camera didn't catch a thing," he said. Mr. Williams gave a wry smile. "Geraldine knows every inch of this neighborhood. If she's doing it, she probably knows where cameras don't point." Mr. Jackson's stomach twisted. That was the power she held. Even suspicion came with a price. He tried the official route, but that was no good either. He sent a formal complaint to the HOA, and Ms. Thomas responded with a clipped email saying the HOA wasn't responsible for individual property security. The police took a report but said without proof, their hands were tied. He sat in his living room, staring at his computer, and knew he was in a corner. She was going to bury him in, fines if he called her out, and if he stayed quiet, she'd just keep on taking. It was then that an idea came to him, born from weeks of frustration. An empty box wouldn't do. She'd just take it and toss it, and he'd be right back where he started. He needed something that would hit harder, something she couldn't deny or brush aside. He remembered a skunk had sprayed near his garage a couple of weeks earlier, and that memory sparked an idea. He drove to a feed store and bought a metal cage, the kind used to trap raccoons. That night, he baited the trap. By dawn, the faint rustling told him it worked. Inside the cage was a small skunk, agitated but unharmed. "Sorry, little fella," he said, covering his nose. "You've got a role to play." He carefully placed the trap inside a large cardboard box, cut air holes along the sides, and taped it shut. On the outside, he slapped on a bright red, fragile, "Handle with care" sticker. That afternoon, he placed the package on his porch, angled perfectly within the camera's view. He waited. About 3 o'clock, Ms. Thomas emerged from her house. She strolled casually, then her eyes locked on the box. She glanced around, and in one smooth motion, scooped up the package. She cradled it against her hip as if she were doing a good deed, then walked briskly back toward her garage. Mr. Jackson gripped the curtain. "Got you," he whispered. From his window, Mr. Jackson couldn't see directly into her garage, but he didn't need to. Moments later, the muffled clang of a cage shifting was followed by a sharp, high-pitched shriek. Then came the smell. It didn't just drift into the air. It poured out thick and sour, rolling across the cul-de-sac like an invisible storm cloud. Mr. Jackson pressed his hand against his mouth, laughing into his palm. Neighbors stepped out of their homes, wrinkling their noses. Within minutes, Ms. Thomas stumbled out of her garage, gagging. Her blouse was stained, her hair disheveled, her hands waving helplessly. Her clipboard, the very symbol of her authority, dropped to the driveway forgotten. She spotted Mr. Jackson watching from his porch, and for the first time, she looked completely rattled. The trap had sprung, and the neighborhood was about to learn the truth. As the stench lingered in the air, neighbors started gathering on their porches, whispering. "I can't say I'm sorry she got sprayed," Mr. Owen Williams said, a little smirk on his face. "She's been throwing her weight around for years." Across the street, another neighbor called out, "Hey, Mr. Jackson, whatever you ordered sure made an impression." The people who had once been too nervous to even mention her name were finally seeing her vulnerable. Ms. Thomas tried to rally, yelling across the street, "You think you're clever, Mr. Jackson? This is harassment." But he was calm and firm. "I didn't put that package in your garage, Ms. Thomas. You did, and you did it because you thought it was yours to take." Her hands trembled as she gripped her scrub brush. "You're going to regret this," she threatened. "You've been making everyone here regret moving in," Mr. Jackson replied. "Maybe it's time you regret something for once." Later that week, an emergency HOA meeting was called. The room buzzed with quiet outrage. Ms. Thomas tried to claim it was an act of harassment, but the residents weren't having it. One by one, they spoke up. "I lost my gardening tools last spring," one said. "My daughter's birthday gift disappeared," said another. The voices stacked on top of each other, forming a chorus Ms. Thomas couldn't drown out. She raised her hands, but her authority was slipping. Finally, she dropped her clipboard onto the table with a sharp crack and stormed out. The neighborhood knew then that her grip on power had been broken. In the weeks that followed, the tension in the neighborhood felt like it had been lifted. Ms. Thomas, stripped of her title, retreated into her house. The people of Clover Hill, who had been divided by fines and fear, began to talk to each other again. They discovered they weren't isolated victims. They were a community that just needed a reason to unite. The story of the skunk became a neighborhood legend, passed around at gatherings, a reminder of what they had overcome together. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the smallest act of defiance can break the strongest chains of control. And when one person speaks up, it gives others permission to do the same. The next HOA board elected a new president, a woman named Carmen Alvarez, who promised transparency and fairness. A couple of months later, Mr. Jackson finally got a new grill he had been saving up for. He set it up in his driveway, and before long, neighbors wandered over, drawn by the smell of burgers. Someone brought potato salad, another brought drinks, and soon the whole block was having an impromptu cookout. Mr. Jackson leaned against the grill, listening to the laughter and conversation, and for the first time since moving in, he truly felt like he belonged. This was what community was supposed to be. People looking out for each other, not rules and fear. The truth was out, and for the people of Clover Hill, it couldn't be taken back.